Yeah, I want to talk about my friend Maxim Butkevich, also a friend of many other activists. Maxim has been in prison already almost 2 years. He's a prisoner of war, but he also was sentenced in a kangaroo court about war crimes he allegedly committed. He's of course innocent. This is completely trumped up charges. But yeah, he's also a veteran of anarchist and anti-fascist movement in Ukraine. Yeah, he was a reserve lieutenant, and when the full-scale invasion started in the February of 2022, Maxim enlisted to the Ukrainian army. He participated to the fighting around the Kiev, and then when he was sent to the east to the fighting, his unit in June was surrounded. He surrounded by Russian troops, and he decided to capitulate. And this way he saved all of his company. There was some days that nothing was heard about Maxim. Then in a couple of weeks there were some videos. These are Russian propaganda videos which they published about the prisoners, that they are kind of parading the prisoners. This is forbidden in the International Convention. Parading the prisoner of war is a war crime. Obviously this is sometimes also has been done sometimes by some United States officials, but anyway. But on the other hand, the good side is that this way the friends and relatives of Maxim, they learn that he is still alive and also not starved to death, which is a risk in the Russian prisoners of war camps. So in the spring of 2022, he was 23, so 1 year ago, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison in the Luhansk People's Republic. These were articles of cruel treatment of civilians, use of prohibited methods, and attempted murder. But all of this doesn't make sense. The events that allegedly did took place, they were taking place in the city of Severodonetsk. It was even 10 days before Maxim's unit was located in this area. Also, the court process was completely trumped. He couldn't decide his own lawyer. Obviously he has had some lawyer attempted by this so-called separatist republics, but yeah, he only managed actually to talk to his own lawyer in this appeal cassation court in the Moscow, which was in the next August. And he was not even personally there in Moscow. He was just connected with video from this Luhansk People's Republic. But yeah, and why Maxim was singled out for this kind of treatment? It's obviously because of his human rights activities for the last 20 years. This court, this appeal court in Moscow, it was visited by some of the most known human rights advocates in Russia. It was Svetlana Gannushkina from the Civic Assistance Committee, and then Oleg Orlov from Memorial. Maxim, of course, knew both of them from his long-time activities. And this was also a first time that anyone could actually talk to Maxim after these months of imprisonment, or even more than a year actually. It was in around almost 14 months that Maxim didn't have any communication with the outside world and didn't even knew any news. And then in March, he was in March 13, there was a Supreme Court cassation. And but this time the jailers didn't anymore allow Maxim to communicate with the public. His mic was turned off. He was just could show some gestures for people who were following, but he was cheerful and smiling. Svetlana Gannushkina was still in the march. attending this appeal court. Oleg Orlov couldn't come because he's himself now jailed in Russia for 2.5 years for telling the truth about the war in Ukraine. But now, yeah, Maxim changed his position in the cassation court. In the previous court stages, he admitted the guilt. Obviously, it was pointless to protest against these completely trumped up charges. Didn't even discuss them in the appeal court. It was just a hope that there will soon be exchange of prisoners. He was actually promised this, but of course this was a lie. That if he is not denying the charges, that he might be exchanged. But obviously, yeah, this was a lie. It was not going to happen. Supreme Court didn't found it necessary that Maxim was actually pressured for this connection, and also torture that Maxim was indirectly telling about. But yeah, he was still had this verdict. And yeah, there is actually now people like Maxim is not in any urgent need of financial help, for example. He has wide connections all around the world with the journalist community, with the human rights community. But this financial support doesn't really help so much because his communication with his lawyers has been in all the stages so severely restricted. First time he actually started to receive some letters also in the spring of this year, but now recently I heard that there has again been some problems with receiving letters. And yeah, so basically the only hope is that Maxim will be included in some prisoner exchange, but he is hated by the Kremlin, but not necessarily the best friend also of the Ukrainian government. So it might be that we have to wait for this, or even to the end of the hostilities. And yeah, there are lots of articles about Max, lots of texts. What a great person he is, but this obviously don't change the situation so much, but also I don't, hopefully there is not any harm. So this is, yeah, why I'm also writing about Max and making this broadcast. So, yeah, I've heard like some friends of mine has said that Maxim has considered himself anarchist even recently. I don't know about this. He never wrote about this in the social media. I also was mostly discussing with him like business stuff, kind of some activist stuff whenever we had some common stuff to do. But it doesn't really matter, like to me it doesn't matter what is, or it's like a secondary thing, what's people's self-identification. The main thing is what the person is actually doing with the actions. And I think for me, like Maxim has for maybe last, I would say 18 years been like exemplary anarchist, like how basically anarchists should live according to principles. He was in his work doing some serious journalistic work, also researching Ukrainian fascists, which is of course not a safe topic in Ukraine. He was threatened for this. But yeah, after his activism, the second workday began, like it happens with many activists. And what was basically Max's activist field, what was his kind of main life interest, was the protection of the migrants. And this is of course not any big or popular topic in Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe. Never had much migrant population. People probably don't have much understanding that we have enough of problems of our own, like what is our use for some random, for example, Uzbek Islamists persecuted people who just by accident happen to end up to Ukraine because of some events, and are in the danger of deportation back to Uzbekistan, where they would likely be jailed for the rest of their lives or executed even. But yeah, for Maxim, these people's rights did matter. He was defending it. He was defending lives of many people. Also, he was saving many anti-fascists who escaped from Russia, from the prison terms, for example, after different anti-fascist activities, after the Himki campaign against the new high-speed road between Moscow and St. Petersburg, which ended up to heavy repressions against anti-fascists in Russia. And I think, yeah, there is not a single right way to be an anarchist, to follow anarchist principles. I think, yeah, you can be like underground anarchists, fighting all the confrontation with the state and the capital in any ways, do direct actions, never activate your own MFAs. But I think you can also try to follow anarchist principles by openly, and this is why many anarchists end up doing journalism and human rights work and so on. So try to somehow influence the system, but without taking the state power. And Maxim did both. He was both in human rights field active and also in journalism, and he was excellent in both of the fields. And one of the inspirations for Maxim's migrant rights works, it was the border camp movement, which was especially around 20 years ago active in the Europe, also in the East Europe and Poland. First Polish camp was in year 2000. And then there were 3 following camps. The first camp was in Ustrzyki Gorne. It's an area in Poland which is bordering both Slovakia and Ukraine. It's kind of southern border of the Ukraine. And for this camp, one of the key activists, comrade of Max, made the logotype, which was drawn by, it was in this Tigra Nigra group in which Max was a member. And I still have a t-shirt of these 2000 camps from 24 years ago. I can show. Yeah, it looks like this. And this has like all the regional languages, like 4 different languages. The text now on is illegal and also in English. But this logo in the center with this foot which is crossing the border, it also became a logotype of Maxim's organization Without Borders, the Bez Granic, that Maxim then founded to fight for rights of the migrants. And yeah, now of course this seems like to be a very distant period of time, this anti-border camps. There was this little green man in Ukraine, and all of these attempts to infiltrate Ukraine, and the borders, eastern borders of the European Union, they are pretty much closed. In Finland they are completely closed. In Lithuania, Latvia, and Ukraine, there are and not Ukraine but Poland. Basically, the pushbacks procedure is accepted by the state. So this seems to be like happened a long time ago, like this border camps, like they were another reality. But also even 20 years ago, this was border camp movement was not a wide movement. It was mostly these camps. They were attempted by some anarchists and anti-fascists, anti-racist activists, migrant rights defenders. So usually just a few hundred people were attending. The biggest camp in the Eastern Europe was organized by Maxim and his comrades. It was in Zakarpattia, the border area of the Ukraine, close to Hungary and Slovakia. It was in August 2007. There were 300 participators and lots of different actions around in the area. Also protesting the local deportation centers where people who have been detained in the border are being put. But also lots of discussions like stuff like feminism, anti-fascism, animal rights, anti-homophobia discussions. Environmental problems were discussed, free software, housing self-government, cooperative economy. So it was like basically radical anarchist, radical left camp, having people from all around Europe. I was already like joining the border camps before. I was in the camp organized by Max. I was in 3 in Poland. There were altogether, I think, 4 border camps. I was in 3 of them, and yeah, but still, this Ukrainian camp, they were like bigger. I had lived like I think 8 years in Moscow, but it was still like more culture shocks than the Polish camps. For example, there were some Belarusian antifa who put up the Belarusian flag, the 90s flag, and the original flag of the Belarusian Republic, this white, red and white flag. And we were like, what is this? What is this nationalism? But then the Belarusian anarchists, they explained that this is not a state flag, it's just a general flag of anti-Lukashenko movement. Also, I remember there were some Ukrainian antifa from the western part of Ukraine, from the Lviv or some surrounding areas. I don't remember exactly. They had UPA t-shirts, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. And of course, everyone from Moscow was a bit shocked about this. But then the Ukrainians explained us that in these local western Ukrainian areas, UPA is not so much remembered for these massacres against Jews and Polish, and this doesn't necessarily the sympathy for UPA, it's just more general, like anti-Nazi and anti-Stalinist sympathy against the totalitarian regimes. It doesn't mean that people who kind of identify with the UPA, that they would immediately want to massacre all the Jewish people or the Polish and so on. And yeah, obviously there were also communications problems and misunderstanding between the Eastern anti-fascist and some queer activists from Germany. And the vocabulary obviously was quite different of these people, which also resulted in conflicts. Also, there was problems because lots of the people, especially those who came from the West, they had much more different perception of what is kind of realistic and possible protests. And immediately when there were demonstrations in the deportation centers and in the city, people started to do some more direct actions. For example, they took down the European Union flag. It was burned in some demonstration. This was not something that was planned by the camp organizers. They had estimation that this would mean a big risk for the camp, that it might be some like raided by the police and so on. People who came didn't necessarily understood this. They just wanted to increase the confrontation. But anyway, nothing eventually. There was no serious, luckily, there was no any serious repression, but all of these conflicts and tension, and also solving everyday problems, because the organizing group was pretty small, but there were 300 people coming. So Max was completely stressed from day one. I think he was oldest of the most experienced organizers, so all the main responsible was from him. He was all the time completely stressed, like chain smoking non-stop. And he never again organized any of these border camps. But still, for me, it was a great inspiration. Without all of these conflicts, or even with all of these conflicts, the general atmosphere was very positive. The place was very beautiful. There was a nice river next to the camp. So yeah, and I met some of the people who were like some of my best friends. I tried to look some photos online, but it was 17 years ago, so if there were some photos, they have now been disappeared from the internet. There are some pictures in the Autonom journal. This is Autonom number 29. There is also article. I will link, but this is not being translated to English, but yeah, there is some. I don't know if it's possible to see. There is EU flag being burned, some protest demonstrations. Yeah, this kind of stuff. I don't. Might be also some reports in English of the camp. But yeah, but I knew Max already many years before. First time I actually met him more than 24 years ago in the winter of year 2000, my first year in Moscow. I was living in this commune 2 years it was in the southern Moscow, not so far from the Warshawskaya metro station. And yeah, Maxim was visiting there, and he had left some cassettes to the commune that he had recorded in the former Soviet Union. This was still a cassette time. People usually didn't have CD players, only cassettes, and I could take some of these recordings made by Max to the dormitory. I then, like in 2002, I moved to the dormitory of the People's Friendship University, and I had, for example, cassettes of Bob Marley's Survival. I was familiar with Bob Marley before, but this is the first time I was kind of in the mood and could, started to really appreciate this music. So I maybe wouldn't care about reggae music at all without Max. Actually, before this, it was one of the few music styles I didn't like at all, but now I started to like it. And yeah, last time, this was my first time I had some things to do with Maxim. The last time was 4 years ago, when, or maybe 3 years ago, there was Grigory Zinchenko. He was underground activist who was waging a partisan war, mostly against the mobile station in the Donetsk region, against the separatists and the Russian occupation. He was then caught he was caught once, but then exchanged in the prisoner exchange, but he went back there to do more partisan actions, and he was sympathizing with the anarchists. He sent his statements also to the anarchists. So I tried to find out, I think a bit before the invasion, maybe 2021, if there is something that can be done for Zinchenko. But Maxim asked some people around in Kiev, but made a conclusion that there is really, like, you cannot have independent lawyer. There is not really available of international mail to this separatist republic. So whoever is being held in prison in these separatist republics, there is not much that can be done to help them. But yeah, and less than 1 year later, Maxim was basically in the same situation, being held incommunicado in this separatist thing. Yeah, also one interesting personal detail about Maxim is his religious convictions. He was open with this, writing about this in Facebook. He's an Orthodox Christian. It's not so common in the Western Europe or Western world for anarchists to be religious, but it's quite common in the former Soviet Union. And yeah, for Maxim there was no any contradiction with this. And also with my friendship with Maxim, and also with Dima Petrov, who died in last year in the fighting around Bakhmut, I met religious anarchists, and I started to understand myself also that there is not like any contradiction between religious convictions and anarchists. Even through I don't have any religious interest or spiritual interest or anything. But yeah, it's of course another thing with that the relationship between anarchism and institutional religion. This is not, of course, not so much compatible, but I don't see nowadays anymore any problem with anarchism and some religious ideas. So yes, in the end, I would like to thank Maxim for everything, for common activist struggles, for organizing the border camp, which was the best, or at least the most memorable border camp I have attended, for these friends whom I made in these border camps, So I really hope that we will soon meet again.